I guess we are ready. Let's start with prayer. Merciful Lord, we pray your blessings this day, that you send us your Holy Spirit, that you help us understand your word and see within it the care and the love that you have for us. For Jesus' sake, amen. All right, we are to Daniel 11. Now, I partly apologize for today's lesson because it's a lot of historical minutia, and I don't mean to, overwhelm you with a bunch of stuff that seems irrelevant, but there's a reason for the historical minutia, because the prophecy itself gives it. So in chapter 11, chapter 10 kind of existed to prepare us for chapter 11. Chapter 10 told a story about the angel coming to Daniel and giving him this special vision. And it was at Passover time, and it's a special vision. There is, according to other theologians, much smarter than me, there's nothing else like this anyplace in the Bible. And part of what's not like this anyplace else in the Bible are the details, the minutia. That it is so incredibly detailed as far as what the future would bring and what would happen, that especially liberal historians and liberal scholars think there's no way this could have been written before these events. That probably what happened was it was written after the events, and that Daniel's name was just put on it, or that somehow or another it was kind of back-written into Daniel's prophecy so that people think Daniel wrote it, but Daniel didn't really write it because it's just too detailed. So that's kind of how the liberals want to dismiss this text. But when we read this and consider the fact that Daniel is writing this in the ballpark of 300 years before these events happened, and that God sees these events in that kind of detail, it actually offers a tremendous comfort to us in a way. So anyway, chapter 11 of Daniel. I'll start just with the first verse. Also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. All right, we've heard the name Darius the Mede several times in the Daniel prophecy. Darius the Mede, Darius is a name given to this man, a Persian name given to a man who had a different Mede name. This empire at this time was the empire of the Medes and Persians. Cyrus is the Persian emperor who united his kingdom with the Median Empire and formed this kind of superpower of the day. So Darius is Cyrus, the main emperor's general, who overtook Babylon and was now governing Babylon and bore the title himself of a ruler of this area because that was given him by Cyrus. So Darius the Mede. And he said, even I stood up to confirm and strengthen him in his first year, which means this happened, the timestamp happened, the first year of Persia's conquering of Babylon. That would have been a year of incredible upheaval. You think, put it in today's terms, in today's events even, with Russia trying anyway to take Ukraine. Had they succeeded and taken it, that first year of occupying it would have been a very tense year for whoever the occupiers were, because the guerrilla warfare going on, would have continued. There would have been assassinations, political intrigue, all kinds of horrible things happening while they governed. So the same thing would have happened then. Persia takes over Babylon, which was the previous superpower for a number of years. And now you have this kind of occupying force in hostile territory where the hostile people really don't want to be conquered, and they're going to be fighting back in any way they can. So for Daniel to say that he stood up and strengthened this man who was the governor of the enemy forces, would have made Daniel an enemy of all of the native Babylonians because he's supporting and occupying power. So politically, this was an extraordinarily dangerous thing for Daniel to do, and partly explains why the governors and satraps and such rose up against Daniel and tried to have him assassinated by throwing him in the lion's den. He was supportive of the Persians and the Persian governor, Darius. Also explains why Darius liked Daniel so much. He was like the one guy he could trust in a very hostile situation. All right. Verse 2. And now I will tell you the truth. Now this is the angel talking to Daniel. Now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. Now this is where the detail of it all starts. And the way this prophecy will work in chapter 11 is he's going to start close, recent history, and then get further and further out historically, away from Daniel. So this first verse here, verse 2, is the immediate stuff coming next historically. So he predicts 4 kings, the 4th of which will be richer than all the rest, rising up in Persia. Historically, this is exactly what happened. And this is why liberals fall all over themselves trying to dismiss Daniel, because what the angel predicts happened word for word. So here are the 4, and this is why I partly apologize for all the historical detail, but it's fascinating too, to me, to read the history, because you can see God saw all of this stuff, all the slimy intrigue and nastiness and viciousness and behind-the-scenes stuff. God saw it all and prepared his people for it, just to let them know this stuff wasn't just random chaos happening. God knew all this was going to happen. So the 4 kings of Persia, Cambyses, the first, reigned for 8 years. Eldest son of Cyrus. Cyrus was the main emperor of Persia. Eldest son of Cyrus, said to have married 2 of his sisters, which was even forbidden back in those days. Led military campaigns against Egypt, died after suffering a wound on his thigh, which may have been the result of a self-inflicted accident. We know for sure he died of a wound on his thigh, and it's thought he did it. There's a couple of versions, either by sharpening a knife and right into his thigh while he was doing it, or mounting his horse, and supposedly the end of his scabbard busted off, and he jammed the sword into his thigh. But at any rate, it became infected, and he died of gangrene. So he didn't die well. The next one, Pseudo-Smerdis, pseudo meaning it wasn't really Smerdis, a.k.a. Bardia, the younger half-brother of Cambyses and younger son of Cyrus, with obviously another wife. He was murdered by Cambyses out of envy shortly before Cambyses' own death. After Cambyses died, a man pretending to be Smerdis assumed the Persian throne, thus Pseudo-Smerdis. Pseudo-Smerdis proclaimed himself king. Darius claimed that the real name of the usurper was this Gaumata, a priest from Media. Now, Darius is not Darius the Mede from Babylon. This Darius is another Darius who becomes the Persian emperor. The new king transferred the seat of governor to Media. A number of Persian nobles discovered that their new ruler was an impostor, and a group of 7 nobles formed a plot to kill him. They surprised him at a castle in Nyssa and stabbed him to death in September 522 BC. One of the 7, Darius, was proclaimed a ruler shortly thereafter. Yeah. So the next emperor would not even last a year. I think he was in there 8 months. So, and the story goes that the eldest son, who was the emperor, envied his younger brother because the king of Egypt had sent the Persian emperor a fancy bow. And Cambyses, the eldest son, couldn't shoot it right, but the younger son could. And, was getting all this laud and praise as this great archer. And evidently he was envious of all of this younger brother being held up as something great, so he just had him killed. Siblings. Yeah, imagine the chaos of those days. You don't like your brother, just have him killed. And then this, of all the nerve to claim to be the younger brother, supposedly it was like a servant, a brother of a servant, in fact, who happened to look something like this Smerdis, and his brother pushed him to assume the throne and try and fool people. And they kept everybody away who actually knew the real Smerdis, until eventually they just plain couldn't keep up the ruse. Yeah.
You say murdering your siblings bad. I think marrying.
Marrying their siblings. Yeah, both of those things going on. Yeah.
That went on a lot in Egypt, though, too, to keep the bloodlines, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of genetic not mixing, right? Family trees without branches, yeah. All right, now here's a different take on it. This is Herodotus, a Greek historian, records the events this way. A nobleman suspected that the king was not the brother of Cambyses, but rather the Smerdis whose ears Cyrus had commanded to cut off for some grave reason. So yeah, his younger son, mind you, made dad mad, so the punishment father came up with for the younger son, have his ears cut off. So to confirm whether or not this was the actual younger son, Otanus asked his daughter, Phaidamede, who is a member of the harem and thus had access to the king, to check whether the man had ears. Phaidame, I guess, does as asked, and one night, while the king is asleep, confirms that the king does not, in fact, have ears. His suspicion confirmed. Actually, this is the servant that Cyrus, not the son, my mistake, had cut off. Otanus then gathers 6 noblemen and plots to get rid of the false Smerdis. A 7th nobleman, Darius, arrives at the capital shortly thereafter and is then included in the group. The 7 conspirators charge into his chambers of the king, and while 5 deal with guards, Darius and Megabyzus kill the false Smerdis and a companion. So what a mess. 5 days later, after the tumult had died down, the 7 men meet again to discuss a suitable form of government. After some discussion over the merits of democracy proposed by Otanus, and oligarchy proposed by Megabyzus, and monarchy proposed by Darius, 4 of the 7 voted in favor of a monarchy. They then decided to hold a contest whereby whichever of them got his horse to neigh first after the sunrise shall become king. Darius cheats and ascends the throne. How do you cheat in that contest? There's an answer to that. Supposedly, that was the thing. They were all supposed to get on their horse and face the sunset, and the first horse that neighs, that guy got to be king. So how do you get your horse to neigh? According to one report, Darius's servant knew of a mare that Darius's horse liked. And that mare was, I guess, near foaling time or some such thing, or near its, however they do that, if they come in heat, I don't know. I don't know how horses do that thing. But anyway, went to the mare, rubbed his hands on the mare's private parts, and then as the sun rose, stuck his hands in that horse's nose, and the horse immediately neighed. And supposedly Darius even had a statue erected for this servant, horse tender, who helped make him king. So, again, I apologize for all of the weird historical detail in this, but imagine God being able to see all of this in front of him and know everything is going to happen. And he's giving Daniel the basic details of how all this stuff is going to happen, just to know there's no such thing as chaos. There's no such thing as any of this being out of God's control. As devious, as ugly, as wicked as it all is, God knows all of it is going to happen. And I think it's a difference. It's a difference between foresight and foreordination. It's not that mankind doesn't have a free will and everybody's just kind of following a script. It's that God sees the future and knows the horrible things mankind is going to do before he does it. So to us, time is a line where we can't see what's ahead. To God, time is laid out like a panorama before him where he sees everything from beginning to end.
It's funny, Nostradamus, they don't question so much what he foresaw and stuff like they would.
Yeah, like this. And he got a lot of things wrong. Daniel didn't. The next king, number 3, Darius, the guy who cheated in the horse neighing contest. There are his dates. Born of a military officer in noble court of Cyrus, he spent much of his early reign putting down revolts throughout the empire. He established himself through military power. It was Darius who chose to attack Greece and who lost at the Battle of Marathon in 492. He organized coinage as a new uniform monetary system, made Aramaic a co-official language of the empire alongside Persian. He built better roads throughout the empire and introduced standard weighing and measuring systems. Darius worked on other construction projects throughout the empire. He had the cliff face inscription carved into Mount Behistun to record his conquest, which would later become an important testimony of Old Persian language. Darius died after 30 days of illness, about 64 years old. Now, Darius turned out to be a good king despite his horse cheating, and he reigned for a decent amount of time compared to the others. This is Darius the First. Part of the history problems is the same use of names. So you've got Darius the Mede, who lived not quite 100 years before this Darius, and then you're going to see multiple Dariuses after this one. So sorting them all out gets to be a mess. The last Persian king, and this is the 4th one mentioned in Daniel's prophecy, end of verse 2, he shall be far richer than them all, and by his strength through his riches he will stir up all against the realm of Greece. This is Xerxes. Xerxes, by the way, is the Persian king that Ruth marries. And the book of Ruth is all about Ruth and her life with Xerxes. So Ruth of the Old Testament turned out to be one of the wives in the harem of Xerxes. So he has yet another connection biblically for us. Xerxes is the son of Darius. His mother was the daughter of Cyrus, which means he has double claim on royalty, both father and mother. Xerxes was crowned and succeeded his father in October to December 486, when he was about 32 years old. Transition of power to Xerxes was smoothed due again in part to the great authority of Atassa, that's his mother, and his ascension of royal power was not challenged by any person at court or in the Achaemenian family or any subject nation. He was the favored son all along. Xerxes concentrated his efforts on making much larger and grander monuments and completing greater building projects than his father. He maintained roadways throughout the empire, especially the royal road, by which messages were carried, the precursor to the Roman mail system, and later the modern-day postal system. develop both time and funds to expanding sites such as Susa and Persepolis. So yeah, Darius starts the postal system. Imagine that. Or Xerxes, sorry. Xerxes starts the postal system. Although Darius' palace still stood, Xerxes commissioned an even more elaborate building project to raise his own opulent palace nearby, and also commanded the construction of the Hall of 100 Columns. The exorbitant costs of these projects, coupled with the expense of the expedition to Greece, put tremendous strain on Xerxes' subjects through heavy taxation. Xerxes, however, appeared not to notice a problem and continued to do as he pleased. All right, so Daniel describes he will be far richer than them all. Well, history tells us he was. And he got that way by overtaxing his people. I could make a comment about one of the first Democrats there that believes in high taxation in order to get his projects through. Well, he did. He also put together, and this cost a fortune, the largest military ever known in history up to that time. Some Greek historians have estimated it at 2 million strong, his army, which he aimed at Greece and wanted to attack Greece with, and did. This is recorded again in Daniel, that he will stir up all against the realm of Greece. He takes his huge army and goes after Greece with it. So the next paragraph, he mounted a massive expedition against Greece in 480 BC, which according to Herodotus assembled the largest, most well-equipped fighting force ever put into the field up to that point. He was assassinated in 465 by the commander of his own bodyguard. According to Aristotle, Artabanus, that's Xerxes' chief bodyguard, killed Darius, Xerxes' eldest son, then killed Xerxes. After Artaxerxes, the third son of Xerxes, discovered the murder, he killed Artabanus and his sons. Everybody killing everybody for the sake of getting power. That was the ancient world. So everything this angel predicts happens, just like he predicted. The power and might of Xerxes aimed at Greece, which is by the way, he lost. He lost against Greece with a 2 million man army. He succeeded in conquering a northern section of Greece, but never got main Greece. And that would be the ultimate destruction of Persia because of it. Because the next thing to happen historically is Greece is going to want revenge for what Persia has done. And thus, the arisal of Alexander the Great. Who wipes Persia off the map. Verse 3, that a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That's Alexander the Great. And yeah, when he says with great dominion, Alexander, there's his kingdom laid out on the map, which is larger than the Persian Empire and includes the entire Persian Empire. He took over everything, Alexander the Great. He had great dominion and did according to his will. He conquered every place he could, all by age 32. He dies at age 32. He conquered the known world by age 32. That's impressive. Verse 4, and when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. So when Alexander dies, Alexander does not have an heir. And what happens is, this vast kingdom that he conquered in a matter of a few years is divided up between four generals. So once more, the angel is spot on about the four division part. It shall be divided into the four winds. So the four generals divide this kingdom up, each take a quarter of it as their own. And as you would expect to happen, they start warring with each other. And there's a lot of intrigue and all of that goes with it. And historically, all this stuff is so well documented. We know exactly the names of these guys and who they were. Ptolemy I, as an example on the list there, rules Egypt, Palestine, Sicilia, Petra, Cyprus. He founded the Ptolemaic dynasty that lasted until the death of Cleopatra. Ptolemy I was Greek, ruling Egypt. You still hear a lot, archaeological stuff, if you ever watch the History Channel, about Ptolemy and the Ptolemaic kingdom. I had always assumed that was an Egyptian guy, because it's Egypt. It's not. He was Greece. He was Greek ruling Egypt. And Seleucus I, also known as the Conqueror, ruled the remainder of Asia, founded the Seleucid Empire, which was comprised of Mesopotamia, the Levant Persian part of India. All right, so those are the four players. Verse 5, chapter 11. Then the king of the south shall become strong as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. The king of the south, Egypt, the Ptolemaic kingdom. He rules Egypt, as it says, until his kingdom, his line will rule Egypt until 30 BC with Cleopatra. Turning the country into a Hellenistic kingdom and Alexandria into a center of Greek culture. Ptolemy gained a claim to Judea, that's the Holy Land in southern Syria, which was disputed with the Syrian king Seleucus I. He also took control of Cyprus, etc. Ptolemy also had the Library of Alexandria built. So the two generals start warring over Syria, and it's going to turn into a nasty war. But the king of the south, as the angel predicts, is going to have a great dominion. So he comes out stronger, partly because he throws in with another one of those generals, and together they kind of war against the Syrian king. So now you have two empires rising after Alexander the Great. You have Egypt, which regains some notoriety from its old days, and Syria. And Syria now will be a power to contend with for several decades. Verse 5, we read verse 5. Verse 6, at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up, with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. That's a lot of stuff in a verse. So something about the daughter of the king of the south going to the north to make an agreement. What's that about? Historically, we know the daughter of the king of the south was in fact a daughter of Ptolemy, one of the Ptolemy, the second Ptolemy the second, the one that came right after the first one. And there's something about both the ego and, I don't know, the vanity of these ancient kings. Every one of the kings' sons in the Egyptian kingdom, they named them all Ptolemy. So you've got Ptolemy the first, the second, the third, the fourth. So every Egyptian king in that succession line is all Ptolemy. That would have been a mess to keep track of. Mess for a mother, you know. When you want to yell at your son, what do you call him?
1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so actually, historically, we know 61 years passes now from verse 5 to enter into verse 6. Ptolemy II, also known as Philadelphus, gave his daughter Berenice to the Syrian ruler Antiochus II. When it says in our text, the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, well, that was marriage, that agreement. So Berenice marries Antiochus. The problem is Antiochus was already married. So he put away his first wife in order to marry this Berenice. But when Ptolemy II dies 2 years later, Antiochus divorced Berenice and restored his previous marriage with his first wife. However, the first wife, Laodicea, was mad about being abandoned for another woman. So she had Antiochus murdered. Though Berenice fled and hid in Antioch, she was eventually killed, along with the son she had with Antiochus, who was named Antiochus after his father. They all named their sons their own name. So more grotesque intrigue. She doesn't like being put away, so she comes back and murders her husband for having done it. She mothered a son from Antiochus who was older. He was in his like 18-ish or so when she comes back and murders Antiochus. That way her son could become king and not Berenice's son, who was just an infant at the time. So this is a power grab by her on behalf of her son. Verse 7, but from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. Again, we know historically that back in Egypt, after the death of Ptolemy Philadelphus, Ptolemy III, the eldest son of Ptolemy II, rises to power. He is of the same genetic line as Berenice. He attacks the Syrian Empire with some success. Under him, the Egyptian Empire gained power and Syria lost power. So a branch of one of her roots will arise. Well, it wasn't a son, it was her brother. But it's still same family tree. And he gains power, and he goes after Syria. In fact, the way it happened was, after Laodicea murders Antiochus and tries to seize power, Berenice runs with her infant son to Antioch to hide, and she claims power. So you've got these two women both claiming to be rulers in Syria, claiming the kingdom for their sons. But Ptolemy III takes his army quickly to Antioch to support his sister and to fight for her for power for Syria so her family can control it. Berenice. But when he gets to Antioch and goes into the palace, he finds her and her son dead. So she was assassinated by somebody sent by Laodicea and the son, which makes her son now the sole claim to the throne of Syria.
And they had soap operas back then.
Yeah. But Ptolemy III now is mad that she killed his sister. So he takes it out on whatever towns he comes across that are part of the Syrian Empire and winds up actually sacking a few major cities, including Antioch, I think, claiming them for the Egyptian kingdom and holds them for decades. So Syria is in decline at this point. Egypt is in ascendancy. Also, something significant about verse 8. We haven't got to verse 8 yet. Verse 8, and he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver, gold. He shall continue more years than the king of the north. So he sacks some of the major cities, takes their wealth. But here specifically in verse 8 it said Egypt. So before this it's been king of the south. Now we know for sure the south is Egypt that we're talking about. Verse 9. Then the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So Laodicea's son that she had from Antiochus, Seleucus II, becomes the Syrian king and counterattacks Egypt and attempts to regain his lands. However, he was too weak to succeed and returned to Syria with nothing. Okay, so he doesn't get anywhere, just like the angel tells Daniel. Verse 10. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through, and then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. Historically, again, we know there were two sons of Seleucus. Seleucus III, named after him, again, and Antiochus III team up against Egypt. Seleucus was assassinated by his own army, however, and Antiochus III, also known as Antiochus the Great. I mean, how many the Greats are there back then, too? Another ego trip. Took complete control of Syria. He expanded Syria's power and gained territory against the rising Roman Republic, and also punished Egypt in the process, too. So you see the before and after pictures of the Syrian Empire under Antiochus III, where it's a big empire on the left hand, but on the right, by the time he's done, he's retaken the Holy Land down here, and everything kind of right up to the actual border of Egypt, right up to the Euphrates, and then expanded also eastward a lot. So just like the angel predicts, historically we know this is what happened. Verses 11 and 12. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So it's predicting that Antiochus III is going to attack Egypt. Egypt is going to beat him, but somehow or another not prevail. It's a weird prophecy. Well, here's what happened. And historically, again, this is well documented. During the Fourth Syrian-Egyptian War, 219 to 217. And this, Daniel is hearing this in the late 500 BC. So we're talking about like 300 years now into the future from where Daniel is first hearing this. Egypt had been significantly weakened by court intrigue and public unrest. The rule of the newly inaugurated Ptolemy IV began with the murder of Queen Mother Beatrice II. The young king quickly fell under the absolute influence of imperial courtiers. His ministers used their absolute power in their own self-interest to the people's great chagrin. Antiochus sought to take advantage of this chaotic situation. After an invasion in 221 BC failed to launch, he finally began the Fourth Syrian War in 219. He recaptured Seleucia, Perea, as well as cities in Phoenicia, among them Tyre. Rather than promptly invading Egypt, Antiochus waited in Phoenicia for over a year, consolidating his new territories and then listening to diplomatic proposals from the Ptolemaic kingdom. Meanwhile, Ptolemy's sister, Sacebius, began recruiting and training an army. Isn't that interesting? A woman general. Oh, no, sorry, it's a dude. Ptolemy's minister. I said sister. No, it's a dude. Yeah, that would have been interesting. He recruited not only from the local Greek population, as Hellenistic armies generally were, but also from native Egyptians, enrolling at least 30,000 natives. This innovation paid off, but would eventually have dire consequences for the Ptolemaic stability. In the summer of 217 BC, Ptolemy engaged and defeated the long-delayed Antiochus in the Battle of Raphia, the largest battle since the Battle of Ipsus over 80 years earlier. Yeah, the Battle of Raphia is known as the Great Elephant War, which they don't teach in schools for some reason. Ptolemy's victory preserved his control over Syria, and the weak king declined to advance further into Antiochus' empire, even to retake Seleucia Pieria. The Ptolemaic kingdom would continue to weaken over the following years, suffering from economic problems and rebellion. Nationalist sentiment had developed among the native Egyptians who had fought at Raphia. Confident and well-trained, they broke from Ptolemy in what's known as the Egyptian Revolt, establishing their own kingdom in Upper Egypt, which the Ptolemies finally conquered around 185 BC. So if you look back to the prophecy in Daniel, it talked about how the king of the south, the Egyptian king, would fight with the northern king, who would muster a great multitude, but that multitude would be given into the hands of the southern king. Then verse 12, when he had taken away that multitude, that is when he beat them, he'd be happy, his heart would be lifted up, and he'd cast down tens of thousands of Syrians, and yet somehow he wouldn't prevail. So historically, the Egyptian king beats the Syrian king, rejoices at the victory, but doesn't take advantage of it. He goes back to Egypt and comes to nothing. That great victory he won was meaningless for the advancement of his kingdom. The Battle of Raphia, just a quick glimpse into that.
Pastor,
Yeah,
Pammy has trouble following because
I know. Who doesn't?
because of the time is going down instead of
Oh, that way.
it is now.
Yeah, that's because it's BC, which means you're counting down to 0. So 500 BC is 500 years before 0, and so you're moving closer to 0. Once we hit 0, then we go into the ADs. So yeah, it's counting down to 0, so you're losing years. It's the exact opposite of how we count years. Yeah, the thing about, and all the details don't matter that much, but the funny thing about the Battle of Raphia, if there is a funny thing, evidently the Great Elephant War happened. There's two kinds of elephants. There's Asian elephants and African elephants. Supposedly, the African elephants they're bigger, they're more vicious, and they're stubborn. And Egypt came to the battle with a bunch of African elephants. When the war started, when the actual battle started, they lined up against each other. They had both countries had their elephants on the flanks and their infantrymen in the middle. On one flank, the Egyptian elephants refused to fight. They just wouldn't go. And supposedly the elephant trainers were beating them and prodding them and everything. The elephants just plain refused. And so the Syrian elephants, being Asian elephants, didn't refuse because they're more malleable, and they charged, and the African elephants, which were bigger, turned around and ran away. So it was a complete collapse on one side of the Egyptians. And on the other side, though, the African elephants did fight, and they went in and chased the Asian elephants away. So the two flanks, one went that way, one went that way, and you were left with the fighting cavalry or infantry in the middle, which eventually goes Egypt's way, and they beat the Syrians. So it's kind of funny that the elephants just plain said, I ain't doing that.
With all the fighting, it's wonder they had anybody left to fight.
Yeah, I mean,
Killing everybody.
right. The elephants were the tanks of the ancient world.
I would like to see that. Just saying.
Oh, I felt bad for the poor elephants. And the amazing thing, when you look at the numbers at the end of it, only 5 elephants die on Syria's side, and 16 elephants are killed on Egypt's side. So you'd think an elephant would be a big target, and they'd kill them all pretty quickly, but they were evidently pretty robust in battle and survived it. All right, so last verse we'll look at, and again, sorry for all the detail, but it's just fascinating how God sees it all. Last verse we'll look at, 13. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. So the Syrian king is going to remuster his forces and come back at Egypt. On the handout, back in Palestine, Antiochus took the fortress of Gaza, and in 201 definitively defeated the Egyptians in the Battle of Panion in northern Palestine. In 199, Ptolemy surrendered the Seleucids, conceding all of Palestine and Lebanon's coastland and agreeing to marry Antiochus' daughter Cleopatra. The marriage was celebrated in 197. This is not the Cleopatra of Rome fame, by the way. That was another Cleopatra closer, I think, like 30 BC, like 150 years later. The marriage was celebrated in 197 with a majority of Ptolemy making the Egypt de facto a Seleucid proctorate. Antiochus seems to have been very close to the dream of uniting all of what had been the empire of Alexander. But shortly afterwards, another force was to make its debut on the stage in the ancient Middle East. Rome would, in a few years, reduce its power, that's Syria's power, through the Hellenistic world, putting the foundations for the construction of its own empire. So, yeah, historically, what the angel predicts in terms of the kingdom of the north coming back and overtaking the kingdom of the south happens, but not so much militarily as through politics. Antiochus's daughter marries a Ptolemy, and thus kind of through marriage is able to control their kingdom. So the kind of broad questions after wading through all of this historical detail that the angel nails, by the way, down to some very minor points. Questions: what does all the detail given by the angel say about God?
Right here, and he knows everything that's
He's all seen.
He is all-seeing. He's eternal. He is above time. He knows everything that's going on. He has planned for all of this ahead of time. None of this mess catches him off guard, even though the people, the human beings standing on the sideline watching it all are probably, like watching a ping pong match. Who knows what's coming next? But not to God. He sees it all. So the chaos of world politics in our day, the comfort we can take away from that, none of the stuff that's going on in our world is catching God by surprise in the least. He knows it all. He sees it all. He's in control of it all, even though it doesn't seem controllable. Where it's going to end, we don't know. But we do know that God knows, and that we're safe in his hands. Yeah.
People on the sidelines, how would they keep track of who's in charge?
Yeah.
Some had the same name, especially when they were
Yeah.
off so fast. Who would you know is in charge?
Right.
Well, they were living it day by day, year by year. We're going through it in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But
So,
they were killing them off so fast at that one point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure, with the lack of communication system and all of that they had back then, they probably didn't have a clue what was going on in those levels, your average person. All they knew is some days an army would come from that direction and steal all their stuff, and another day an army might come from that direction and take all their stuff. They're just kind of caught in the middle of it all.
It is comforting, don't you know, that God is in control, because we don't have to get so deep in suffering and pain and worry and
Right.
anxiety.
That's right, and it does help us put the anxiety away and just trust. This is in God's hands. So that's kind of the next question. How can this be immensely comforting for God's people? And the one thing we can take away from all of this is God is in control. No matter the chaos we feel in our own lives, how things are catching us by surprise, we're safe in God's care and keeping because he sees this down to the last detail. And lastly, why is it necessary for Daniel to know this detail? Why does he have to know this like 500 years before any of this stuff is going to happen?
God's going to use him, and he needs to know that God sees it all ahead of him.
Daniel is a prophet. And as such, it is Daniel's job to go to God's people and comfort them. And so God is giving Daniel this special insight so that he's able to offer the people of God the comfort they need and show them that by the grace of God, they are going to be upheld and kept safe through all of this. And they shouldn't worry, and they shouldn't give themselves over to the messy politics and side-taking and all of the stuff that's going to happen. Just stay faithful and true, and God's taking care of the rest. So that was Daniel's job, to bring that comfort to God's people, so Daniel had to know it.
Kind of like you.
Yeah, I haven't, fortunately, no future revelations. So, okay, Any other thoughts? I know it's, again, kind of a weird lesson today. Apologies for that. But this is an unusual prophecy. And there really is nothing else like it in Scripture that gets into such minute detail about kings and everything that's going to happen for hundreds of years in a row like this. It's an amazing prophecy, really. Any comments, any thoughts, any questions? All right. So something else to take away from this. If you have to bring an elephant into a war, you're better with the Asian elephants than you are with the African elephants, even though the African elephants are bigger.
Depends what flank you're on.
It does depend on flanks. All right, let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that everything unseen to us is seen to you, and that you have made allowance for it all and are taking care of us in the midst of it all. We pray that you strengthen us daily. Keep us from worry and doubt and trust in you. For Jesus' sake, amen.